We are back for our next talk with Jessica Sachs. Please welcome Jessica onto the stream. Good morning.
Hello. Oh, it's definitely morning.
Yeah, exactly. It's like 6 a.m. for you?
It's 6 a.m. and I just didn't go to sleep last night. I just stayed up.
No.
Okay.
Go. Go
Okay.
for it. Tell me what you want to say.
So I was supposed to have the talk later in the day, like 2 p.m. my time, but I have to have an emergency wisdom tooth surgery. So I'm getting all of my wisdom teeth out in like 3 hours.
Oh, no.
Which means I can sleep a lot. So I don't mind staying up all night.
Oh, boy. That's something for you. Like all wisdom teeth at the same time. I'm sad to say I have done that.
Isn't it better?
It is. But so it's all in one go, but it's pretty intense.
Yeah.
You know what? We're not going to talk about it. It was not my best experience. Let's talk about your awesome job and your cool talk. Because what is the last time we saw each other? I think it's beginning of 2020, right?
Oh yeah, no. View Amsterdam. I watched your like first remote talk, and I got really envious of your like production style. I did not make it happen this talk, but I.
Yeah, I was just going to say you have the chance now. You're basically pre-recording, right?
This one was not good, but the one for ViewConf US, the lighting is like perfect.
Oh, nice.
I know. I'm getting there. So.
Exactly. So you're going to be talking about your new Cypress component test runner that is actually based on super fancy, like bleeding edge technology. I cannot wait for you to show us.
So it's not based on super fancy. It also works with super fancy Vite. So it works with Webpack.
That's actually
and
better.
Vite.
Exactly.
I know.
Even better, right? Well, you knew because you're going to build this, right? So are you ready to watch your own talk back and ask people stuff in the chat about it?
Yes, so ready.
Let's do it. All right.
Cool.
Everybody sit back and relax. Here is Jessica's talk. Cheers.
Hello, everyone. I'm excited to be here at vueday, Italy. I hope you're having a good time so far, enjoying the presentations and learning things. I know whenever I go to these events, I always learn something new. So today we're going to talk about how to test a Vue application built on top of Vite using Cypress's component test runner. But really, truly, we're going to be talking about what the future of component testing might look like. First, a quick introduction. My name is Jessica Sachs. I'm an instructor at Vue Mastery, and I teach the testing track. I'm a maintainer of Vue's test utils. I work at Cypress, building open source software full-time. I'm the tech lead and architect of the Cypress component test runner, which is what this talk is about. Writing component tests with Cypress is a unique and fun experience, and using it with Vite is so fast, it's a dream. I'm so excited to show you. Let's open up the test runner, build some stuff, have some fun. The biggest problem with component testing today is that you can't see what you're doing. You can't see your components in your tests. And so when they pass or fail, do you have confidence that you actually know what they look like and what your users will see? I don't. Because my users use a browser, and I use a browser. I don't really use a terminal all that much. At least not for components. So why are we testing in the dark? Why are we testing in a place that we can't see? In this dark, dark terminal, and we have no idea what the end result will be when we ship and deploy our code. So if we take a look at a just test failure, this test tells us that we had a form element that was supposed to be visible, and it's not. And so our job, when we get a failing test, like this one, is to start to debug it. And many people have fancy debuggers, but I know a lot of us still use console log. So I'm going to show you how I console log debug stuff like this. So the first thing you do is you check, well, what's the form and why isn't it visible? And so you print out this form result that you get, and you see that it is a DOM wrapper with a wrapper element of HTML form element. And so that tells you a whole lot of nothing about why it's not showing. It just tells you that, okay, there's something there, and I think that it's an HTML element. And you're like, great, that's not helpful. So you dig in further, you're like, all right, let me get the wrapper element, let's see what that is doing. And it's an HTML form element. Again, there's no discernible HTML there, so you have to keep climbing in. And finally, we get this inner HTML off of this form element. And I don't know about you, but I could leave this slide up for a while, and I would still need to read it over and over and over again to figure out if my form is actually visible, or is it in there at all? And so I just Command F for form, and that's how I debug my Jest component tests. And I'm pretty sure a lot of you do the same. So after I fixed this issue, which by the way is not apparent in this markup, you can't actually tell based on this markup why the form wasn't visible. But after I fix it, because I debugged it in Cypress, after I fixed this test, I can see that the diff of the inner HTML is actually not any different between the pass and the fail. And that means that we can't actually use inner HTML in this case to debug what's going on. And I know that there's probably some computed CSS property that I should be looking at to tell me if this is visible or not. But you know as well as I do that there are 1,000,001 reasons why an element couldn't be visible. And to check all of them and to use the weird JS DOM API that you need to use to check all of those different properties, that's just not tenable. And it's particularly frustrating because if you just open up the browser, you'd know. And so what I find myself doing when I'm testing in a terminal is I just don't debug my failures in the terminal. I just open my browser because that has all the tools I need. It has my Element Explorer, it has my console, it has my source code, and it's source mapped, and I have a debugger right there. I don't need to figure out how to launch a node process and attach a debugger to it. I just have the entire Chrome development environment that I work in every single day. Of course I would use that. So testing in the browser gives you visibility into your issues, and it also gives you confidence that you know how to debug a failure, and that when you see a failure, you know what you're looking at. So I want to show you how to test a modal using Cypress component testing. I think it'll solve a lot of these problems. I think you'll love it. So let's go, let's do it. And so we're going to start by testing a modal component that I found while looking for inspiration for this talk. I found something on Grubhub, which is a simple modal. You see them all over the internet. It has a overlay behind it to prevent the parent page from looking so bright. It also has a form inside of it for you to enter your email and your zip code, and a submit button to send your data up to their backend. It has a dismiss button and an X button hiding in the top right corner over here. When you hit the submit button, the dismiss button, or the X button, the whole form should go away as well as the overlay. So far what we have is it is not visible when visible is set to false. So if we have a prop called visible, we'll do that. And then it is visible when visible is set to true. How about it emits a submit event with the form data, and then it can be closed with the X button. So let's start with these 4 tests. So the first thing I do, so I write out all these expectations, and then I open up the test runner. And so this is the Cypress test runner. It's got some hotkeys enabled. and it has a file explorer on the left side. You can, at any point, click on a spec on the left side or search for one. And we're going to jump into our component here. Right now, all of our tests pass because they have no assertions in them. We're going to focus on one test at a time, and I'll show you how I like to develop. So the first thing is that our perks modal isn't showing up, and that's because we haven't passed visible. So we'll pass in the visible prop. All of the commands that I'm using, by the way, are from the Vue Test Utils API. The Cypress test runner and the mount command that comes from @Cypress Vue are thin wrappers around Vue Test Utils. So once we hit save, our component is rendered with the with its information inside of it, and we see we have a nice emoji X button, as well as your form and a button and a dismiss text. So it seems relatively correct. But let's test it. So first thing we're going to do is make sure that it's not visible when set to false. So when we set this to false, actually, let's do it inside of here. When we set this to false and we get the form, it should not be visible. Awesome. And so that passed, it is not visible, and if we toggle this, it starts to fail because the form is not visible. Cypress will tell you exactly why. It will tell you that it's because the parent with the class modal has CSS of display none. And if we look over at our source code here, we can see that we have vShow bound to visible, and that must be evaluating to false right now, because our modal isn't showing up. So if we set this to not be visible, our tests will pass, and we can put this use case inside of the check for what happens if the modal shouldn't be shown. And conversely, we'll make another test for visible true, in which case the form should be visible. Now with these two test cases, let's see. With these two test cases, which we just ran, and we can tell that we ran them because we can expand the events and see the Cypress command log, which is what we call this section. We can see that the command log correctly mounted stuff versus the empty assertions that say there were no commands issued in this test. So that's the test coverage we have so far, and that tells us that we haven't introduced certain kinds of bugs. Namely, if we were to hard code this to true, one of these assertions would fail, and then the other one would pass. Conversely, great. And so that asserts that we are properly listening to the visible property. After this, we can look at the rest of the behavior. I'm going to put in the playground again. I call this a playground, really. It's where I like to make sure my component is behaving as expected. And any states that I want to reproduce or automate again, I just copy and paste it over into a new assertion. So at this point, we have our form here. Now we're going to submit an event with the form data. So to track emitted events, Vue Test Utils has an existing API. And so we can use that and grab the emitted events from it. I'll also show you an alternate way to do this that is a little more semantic and nicer to use than Vue's. It requires writing a wrapper component, which is a strategy I use a lot for everything from provide and inject components to like portals. I really use wrapper components quite a bit. But we'll do the Vue Test Utils method of checking for submitted events. So we have our component mounted, and we're going to find the two input events. Input elements. All right. So we have data test ID, and we're going to grab the email from that and see that it found it. And Cypress will tell you exactly what it found, which is very, very convenient. Because if I had typoed this selector, it would tell me that it couldn't find data test ID mail. And then I could very quickly open up my Element Explorer and see that the element it found was data test ID email, and quickly paste that into here and fix my test. So it's very convenient having the visual debugger here to fix your selectors and such. The equivalent in something like Jest is to just console log your your inner HTML to see what text you're missing, and that can be a little bit frustrating because it's hard to read everything on the terminal. So now we have our data test ID of email, and let's just type into it. Let's type in hello@world.com. Awesome, and you can see it just types it right in. Anytime I save the file, Vite pushes an update over the WebSocket and tells Cypress to reload. We don't actually have native Vite HMR support yet, but once that's in, and there are a few reasons for that, but right now we don't have that in. And once that happens, this should be as fast as your Vite dev server. In the meantime, we use hot reload, which gives us, a few hundred milliseconds. It's not super fast, at least not by Vite's standards. So, but that's something we're really hoping to get to. So we have it. We have our email typed in, and now we can grab the zip code and then type into that. And both of them are filled in, and we can check what happens if we click on the submit button. So let's get the submit button and then click on it. And now we should be able to check, we can see that it was clicked on. And now we should be able to check that the emitted events happened correctly. So what I just wrote was a custom command that's not usually in Cypress. It's called view. And that gives you access to the view wrapper. So if you've ever done, in view test utils, if you ever do something like const wrapper is equal to mount, that's this wrapper. So it's actually the result that we get from mount. We just kind of give you access to it later on. So it's also available on window, but if you're looking to get it within the command chain, you can do it like that. So I always forget what the events I emit are. So I like to put a debugger right here, and Cypress will just jump me right there, and I can start debugging what's on the wrapper. And I'm going to look for a submit event. Even though I think the event I gave was called save, because this submit event is actually the native DOM submit event, and you can tell because it's got the whole event information along with like all of the elements it's touched. So it's pretty cool getting to debug these events, and honestly the view emitted events just straight inside your terminal or straight inside of your browser debug tools. It's pretty awesome. So I think that I called it save, and I did. And so if we grab into the first argument of save, we pass in an object which has the email and zip code, and that looks correct. So let's just assert that that happened. So we said wrapper emitted for save, and then the first argument of the first the first argument of the first emitted event. So we can grab the email and zip code off of this argument, and then we're gonna create a quick reusable data object here, so we don't have to hard code anything. So hello@world.com, and then the zip code of when I lived in New York. Data zip code, and then data email. And now I think let's mute the breakpoints, play through. And now we should be able to assert that the email and zip code are correct. So expect email to equal data email, and then expect zip code to equal data zip code. And both of these assertions work, and that's awesome. So now I can take this test and put it inside of my emits a submit event test. And that's actually not true. It's supposed to emit a save event. Though we could also write a test very quickly to make sure it emits a native submit event. So I suppose we could do expect wrapper emitted for submit to have length. So on to the next test. So now we want to check that our modal can be closed with the X button. So again, I like to go into the playground, copy a mount command. So now we have our modal again, and we have the X button in the top right corner. We want to make sure that when we click on this X button that we're actually going to be able to close it. So we'll find the X button. So I think it was called X button inside of the class. It is called X button, and we are emitting a close event, so I think this is going to work. So we're going to get the X button and click it, and the same strategy we can use this wrapper text to make sure that we are calling close. So this is a valid strategy, and it maps exactly what we just did for the save event. But an alternate spelling of this is by pretending to be the parent component. So the way VueTestUtils works is under the hood it calls create app and then sets up your app as if you would in a main.js file, like the first file you load in your application. And that's how the TestUtils framework works, is it gives you this the ability to define a root level component and pass props into it. Exactly equivalent to this is actually just writing a parent component. And so you wouldn't have to pass in this props information into it because the parent component would do that. So I really enjoy this because it gives me a real world API usage. So I can now stub out my entire page and call it like my web page, as well as a button to show and hide my modal. So we'll hook that up into visible, and then we'll also render the modal, the perks modal here, and say visible is equal to if it's visible or not. The parent component of whoever uses this modal is going to have to define the visible state. We're going to default it to false for now. So at this point, we have our modal, and it's listening to the visible property, and then we also have a button to toggle the modal. The last thing is now we'll mount the wrapper. It won't be able to find the X button because there's nothing open yet, but we can manually test by toggling it and clicking X. Boom, boom. And it's really satisfying, actually. Now that we've finished testing the modal, I'd like to talk about a different way I like to display my components so that I can quickly understand what it is they're supposed to do. This is particularly effective when it comes to presentational components that have a lot of different properties that relate to how they're displayed. and these things can't really be tested easily and may not even have differences in the DOM markup. So being able to reveal these very quickly visually is very helpful. So this is what it looks like. This is the playground that has all of the different permutations for the base button. And we'll hop over to the code in a second, and I'll show you that this is implemented live in Cypress, and that there's a little bit more on how you can make this truly reactive and truly a playground to use. So let's debug the base button. We have the button code here. It seems pretty simple. It takes a slot inside of it, and then it has some classes that are conditionally applied based on the props. So like outline, branded, what color it is, if it's rounded, and some preset sizes. And then the rest of the file is just some style sheets with the proper colors like blue, green, yellow, and red. So I feel like I understand this component. This component, I can read it. It's pretty clean. It seems like I can understand it. Unless I use the component, I don't know if I like how it works or if I agree with how it works. So the thing I usually do generally when I'm working with a component I don't know is I open it up in a sandboxed environment or just somewhere in my application, and I just start using it to see how it works. And that's essentially what I do in Cypress is I make a playground and see if it looks right. So in Cypress, I have a basebutton.sci file. We can switch to it by switching through to the File Explorer, and we can see the default state is it's nice and blue, white text. And now I would want to play with the different properties. So I would maybe do, we would have different props, and I might do, let's say, the success color to see what success state looks like. So let's say color is success. And we can see it's green. And then we can try a warning. And it takes quite a long time to get through all of these different permutations, when all you want to do is get a quick look at what the API is and what all the visual props do. And so I make little playgrounds to display the different permutations. And this is pretty simple, actually. It's just a bunch of for loops over some arrays of properties. You can see just the default behavior as well as what happens when it's small, medium, or large. You can also see outline states as well as rounded states. And then at the bottom, I always have a basic component where the parent can drive the properties. And you can do it like this. Awesome. Sweet. So it lets me really quickly pick the set of properties I want to use inside of my component. So now knowing what the behavior is, I think I want to use primary with maybe a large. And I kind of like the way that outline looks. I wonder, but this is supposed to be a primary call to action on my form, so maybe I'll just keep it large and primary. So we'll go back into the perks modal, go to the base button, say its color is primary, and then size is large. Super. We've been talking almost exclusively about the Cypress component test runner during the entire 30 minutes. So where is Vite in all of this? Well, Vite's there. It's just so imperceptible and so quick that you wouldn't notice it was even there unless you opened up your network dev tools. You might also notice it's there because your source maps are perfect. So if you're opening Chrome in the Sources tab, All of your source maps are perfectly mapped for TypeScript and for Vue. All of the tools you love. Vite just handles the tooling for you. So Vite is just barely there, and Cypress takes advantage of that. The reason Cypress is so seamless is because of Vite and Vite's speed. We have a Webpack implementation, and that's what most people are going to use at first. And it's not terrible. It's as bad as your current developer setup. So it is equivalent to what you're running with Vue CLI or what you're running with a vanilla Webpack setup, because it just uses your dev server. So Vite uses the Vite dev server, and Webpack uses the Cypress Webpack dev server. And both of these make sense. As developers, we each use our own dev servers and environments per project. So having a dedicated adapter so that your test framework, your test runner can use the same bundle config just makes sense. So what did we learn? What did we learn over the last 30 minutes? We learned how to build, test, and debug within Cypress in the Cypress component test runner. We learned how to mount components and then assert on emitted events after we interact with the components. And then we also learned how to assert on the app's visual state and to make sure that it looks correct or is interactable. Lastly, we looked at playgrounds. We looked at these new ways of representing your components in tiny, tiny chunks that can then be pulled out and tested individually. So these are some really cool patterns. I'm excited that I got to share them with you. So for the future, we want you to contribute and support us as we focus on stabilization, support, and plugins. So to contribute, you can submit an issue to the Cypress repository. You can join our Discord or tweet at us to ask us questions or to provide community support. And lastly, you can give us feature requests on the features you want to see. When it comes to the plugins we'll be working on, we're looking to create an environment or an IDE almost that's tailored for your components. So we're hoping to get things like Figma iframes embedded side by side to your development environment so you can see as you develop your component how it looks like compared to the Figma mocks. We're also looking for things like dark mode and viewport breakpoints that allow you to switch between mobile and desktop and tablet. And all of these together, I think, will create a better and better experience. And once we have some basic plugins fleshed out, we're going to make this whole thing pluggable and let the community really make it their own. So thank you for listening, and I hope you learned something during this talk. I hope you're excited about Cypress and about Vite and about Vue 3 and how all three of them can work wonderfully together to give you an awesome app stack that you'll want to work in every day.
All right, we are back. Are you awake?
Yes.
There she is. So one thing I could say from this is visual testing for the win, right? That is just amazing.
Sorry, my other thing was it's hard because you have to mute the other tab to hear you talk.
I just did that also.
I got you.
No, so I just wanted to say visual testing for the win. And I've been working with big agencies and huge teams, and testing was always a KPI, and everybody's like, oh, testing. If I could show them this, they'll be like, oh, that's interesting. That's great. It's a good
fun.
talk. I'm inspired.
It's fun. It's I love using it. When we all had a dream about it. Like my whole team, we have Lachlan and Bart, and they're both, in the Vue community. when we finally like finished it, right, when we got it like working and stable and started to use it, it was so amazing. All of us just couldn't stop using it. It was like we were kind of fanboying on our own stuff.
Well, isn't that the thing you have to have when you do this enterprise thing of your own life kind of thing? And you kind of have to love it. And it shows. It shows in your talk. It's exciting. It just works. It gets out of the way and lets you test, right? And so my thing is, when does a test go from a unit test to become like an end-to-end or integration test? And do we even need jest anymore?
So integration and end-to-end test. This is something I have to explain internally at Cypress, like to marketing.
There we go.
They're like, this sounds like could be taking away from the end-to-end tests. And the answer is yes, actually. So many things that are end-to-end tests probably don't need to be. And at Cypress, like, we get this. And we think it's a good idea, actually. So the boundary is cross-page flows. So you can test an entire page in Cypress component testing. You can test an entire view. I have other examples that do this. But the moment that you go to another page, right, the moment you go from a home page to a list page, that's an end-to-end test. Or if you want to seed a database, do anything that takes time. That's an end-to-end test.
Exactly. And so would you think that with Cypress, do you cover more scope than these end-to-end tests? Are you going to go in territory of no longer needing to write a unit test for a specific function anymore?
You should always write unit tests for functions. I mean, like if you're doing business logic, right? If you're doing, like, I like writing unit tests for Vuex stores, actually. I'm doing a course on Vue Mastery, and it's like that's where I get to nerd out about my like special Vuex strategy.
Cool.
But unit tests, you should always write them, especially for business logic. And component tests, you should always write them too. You know, you encapsulate all of the business logic that you use in your component tests. You want all three.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it feels like what I always enjoy most is just doing my unit test on my Vuex, if I use that, of course. And then the rest should be actually Cypress, in my opinion. It feels like if you build websites, right, that works.
Yes.
And I have always been this director of web dev at an agency who has to tell people you have to test and nobody wants to. And what do you have to tell them if they're watching? How can you convince them?
What I have to tell them, is well, I keep saying it's fun, but the functional benefits, like the hardline selling points, are it will actually catch bugs that just absolutely cannot, and the tests are maintainable. And so debugging your tests will no longer be a headache because you can literally open your dev tools and use the element inspector to click on, why some element isn't being located by your test selector. Like a bunch of those workflows where you're constantly in the browser console or the terminal console logging, like what was returned from Vue test utils. You're like, is this a DOM node? What is it?
Oh, I've been there. Yes.
You can just open your browser and you're like, oh, I typoed one of the examples I didn't show in that talk. It's funny because the talk writes itself once you start building with it. You're like, oh, that's a cool bit. One of the things I found when I was developing that talk was I typoed the zip code selector. I did like zip code as one word instead of zip dash code. So simple to find. It took me like under 30 seconds. Cypress failed. I opened it up and I was like, oh, I forgot a dash. It was so wonderful. So
yeah, isn't it?
Yeah. So speed, maintainability, and then actual stabilization. Like you can see if things are interactable. If a parent is covering an element, like you can actually get so much more test coverage with so much less headache.
And so talking about the coverage with less headache, and you have, let's say, a bigger system that deploys all the time.
Yeah.
How does that work in a CI stack with Cypress?
I mean, Yeah, I mean, so Cypress has a lot of base images and such. It's funny because Cypress also ships with Electron. So if you've ever installed it, you're like, why is it so big? And the answer is because you don't have to manage your browser environment. It's consistent against every single run.
Cool.
And so, and so we also have base images specifically for everything from Circle to TeamCity to Jenkins.
Wow.
People use Jenkins still, right?
Oh boy, yes. Sadly, yes.
I know. Yeah.
But that also means that if you have, let's say we have this Jenkins setup, right? And we deploy multiple times a day, QA runs, whatever. Do you also have like some sort of way to look into the history of all those runs and maybe potentially show differences, or hey, it started breaking when you introduced this and this? Because you know what, this is my life, right? So I'm asking you these questions.
Do you know how Cypress makes money? Do you know our product at all?
I guess you're going to teach me, right?
Oh my gosh. That's the point. That's how Cypress makes money, is we give you insight into your past test runs, and we help you detect when a test broke and if it's flaky, which is actually really cool. We just released that. So if you have a test that's particularly flaky, which it happens a lot in end-to-end tests, but also happens in component tests, as I'm sure many of you know. So we'll tell you like what branch it started breaking on and when. And how flaky is it? Like it's pretty cool. So historical look back. That's the Cypress dashboard, which is our paid
here we
service.
go. Now we're talking. This is the stuff we need. And let's say I am now using, let's say, Cloudflare Pages, or I'm using Vercel or Netlify. Are you integrating with these also as plugins?
So we have good integration with Netlify. As far as like examples go, like we're just a CI task, right? You're just like yarn Cypress and it runs the tests. So so there's nothing special, I don't think, about needing to integrate with services like that. I guess I'm not familiar with like if there's a pre-deploy step with Vercel. I know with Netlify, it just you just put it in there and it's like, okay.
Yeah, it's just one of the steps you put in your And so oh man, I'm just going ham here because I want all this. So how about, is there, let's say you have this history in your Netlify test, you can see the differences in your dashboard. Can I also like query that with a GraphQL API or a REST API so I can make my own interface?
Oh boy, no, not yet. So it's not open yet, basically. We actually are GraphQL based though. Like, so one of our lead engineers, one of our lead architects, he, oh my God, I'm going to butcher this. He was early GraphQL, like 2013, 2014. Ooh, he's actually mentioned in the documentary, which is kind of funny because he's not a core member. But yeah, he's really into it. And so if we do a public API, it's going to be GraphQL.
Yeah, I cannot wait to be integrating those search results next to, let's say, my core web vitals on a dashboard. Right, all of those things, people want that combined, and the future is composability of things. And if Cypress becomes a thing that you can just plug into any sort of digital experience platform, that's going to be huge as startup money, kind of. Right?
You want to see that single pane of glass of I deployed here, and the traffic dropped off when. Yes. And when did the test actually break, and how is that related to the to what merged?
And I would love to then be able to say to UX designers, look, that thing there, that did something, right? Anyways, I'm not going to put my whole life into this Q&A, but this is kind of interesting to see how well this all integrates. And so can you talk to me about like the compatibilities of your, like the component test runner, right? Because it runs with Vite now. What else is there?
Next, create React app. So we have like 4 or 5 of the major React app boilerplates. And then we have Vite, Webpack, Vue CLI, Next for the Vue side. We have Angular in the works, a lot of community interest. So somebody has a PR up for that. But we're not maintaining it for core right now. Essentially how it works is that you have 3 libraries. You have Cypress as the like main workhorse. So npm I Cypress. And then you
Yes.
have your framework and then your dev server. So if you use Webpack, you grab the Webpack one, and then Vue 3 or Vue 2. Same thing for React, at Cypress/React, and then your Webpack or Vite dev server.
Nice.
Yeah.
I can't believe how well this integration with Vue worked. Like what you just showed, it's like you make it sound so simple or look so simple, but maybe it is, right?
Yeah, I mean, everybody who tests is already used to Vue test utils. Yeah, and so it just made a lot of sense to wrap the API. And for React, we're trying for like a storybook-like experience. So you just pass TSX, JSX straight into mount. It does what you expect, it mounts the component.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But having it in Storybook is actually very interesting. Same, maybe in Vue as well.
Wait, we're not sure. We're not sure what we want to do with Storybook. I have a theory, which is that people use Storybook because they want a development environment and not because they want a style guide.
So
That's my
true.
theory.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
But the thing is, if you put a story into Storybook, let's say with Vue, it kind of feels like mounting a unit test. Like how it's written is kind of like, and so
Yeah.
people tend to not use it as much. They just want to build one component and just show it in Storybook. Right? So
Yeah.
maybe you can hop on that train and do great integration there.
Yeah, there's a I was just talking to somebody that contributes to Storybook today/yesterday, depending on if you count me sleeping or not. So yeah, I was talking to somebody who works on Storybook today, and that's exactly what we talked about, is interop, of being able to consume the stories and pull them into the Cypress tests, write your mount setup once, reuse it in both systems.
Oh, that would be awesome.
Yeah.
And show the results maybe in the Storybook interface.
Yeah, that was the other thing we were thinking about. Right now, they have a tests component or tests plugin, but that just shows your source code for Jest, so it doesn't actually provide value.
Yeah, and are you guys doing anything with like how much percentage you have covered of components?
Code coverage.
Is that a thing?
Oh yeah. So we've had code coverage support for pre this alpha, like the original authors, Gleb Bamutov and Dmitry Kovalenko, they're really into code coverage. So anywhere you look for like 2019 era component testing, it'll be like, here's how you do code coverage every single time.
That's cool. So how does that fit? Because like with Jest, for example, you can know if your branches, the if-else things, the lines, all of that. How does that translate to what you guys are doing?
Cypress. Yeah, so I don't think our UI... I don't think our UI integration of displaying code coverage is great, but we do generate the report. So you just open the report. This is one of those things where I'm like, we need plugins. We have the data.
Exactly.
It's right there. Let's just make it appear on the UI. So
wouldn't it be awesome if you could show the code in the UI or even the HTML that comes out and show this part was not tested. You didn't click this button, or that would be cool.
You should come. I want to user test with you.
Am I just describing your roadmap here?
Yes. One of the cool things, we have this really cool welcome screen. There's this thing we recently released called Cypress Studio, which is kind of like what you see is what you get, point and click to create tests situation. So it's super sick. One of our personas at Cypress is QA engineers. And so people who really struggle finding selectors. So we have a lot of features that we get for free from end to end, such as Studio. It's pretty cool.
Okay, this was my next question, because we never know where to put the test, the weight of the resource of the people, right? Are we going to put front-end developers to tests, or are we going to ask QA people to become more technical and then write the tests, or all of that? And it's always a little complicated. But if you have this studio and that integrates well, you probably solve that issue so front-end devs get more time to work on animations and other fun stuff. And of course, do good code and test it. But maybe the end-to-end test could potentially go to the QA people now.
Oh yeah, I mean they always have been able to. Like Cypress's
Sure.
API is super, is pretty non-technical, I would say, on the scale of like Selenium versus, especially like Puppeteer or Playwright.
Selectors,
Like,
remember that?
oh my gosh.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say. No, never mind.
Anyways, thank you so much for your time. We're a little bit over, but luckily we have a lunch break after this. It's great.
Okay.
I'm going to reach out to you because I want to see all of this. I'd love to.
I would love
maybe
it.
Go.
Are you?
No, I have this YouTube channel and we're trying out stuff there. And why don't we do an interview and actually try this out and see how it all fits? Because this is great. Super good.
That was literally what I was going to ask you. That
There
was
we
literally
go.
what I was going to ask you. We're on the same page, Tim.
Exactly. Thank you very much. Good luck at the dentist.
The teeth.
Yes, exactly. But at
Thank
least
you.
after it's done, you can go to sleep and you're a new woman, hopefully tomorrow. We'll see.
Or 2 days. I'll be a chipmunk tomorrow.
Exactly.
Okay. I'll see you,
Thank you
Tim.
very much.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.